Hello there, welcome to the program. I am Imoni Amarere. On August 14, 2019, President Muhammadu Buhari signed into law the Nigerian Correctional Service Act, which seeks to reorient the criminal justice system towards the rehabilitation and reintegration of offenders. The law renamed the Nigerian Prison Service as the Nigerian Corrections Service and replaced some prison time with measures like community service for minor offenses. Under the Act, the Correctional Service was divided into two parts. That is, a custodial service, which supervises persons remanded in custody, and a non-custodial service that oversees non-custodial measures like community service, probation, and parole. Now, almost 3 years after the legal change of status, what has changed in the system? Available records indicate that the prisons are still overcrowded with dilapidated facilities, even with the introduction of non-custodial services. As of January 1, 2022, the 240 facilities across the country hold over 70,797 inmates, as against the 50,153 officially installed capacity of the correction centers, as they are now called. The occupancy level by official estimates is 146.8%. Now, almost 3 years after the reforms, many awaiting trial inmates are still waiting for their days in court, even for minor offenses. Now, during this period, there have been several jailbreaks in different facilities across the country, some of them deadly, with thousands of inmates escaping or unaccounted for. Between April 2021 and November 2021 alone, there were at least 4 or 5 prison breaks in Owerri, Kaba, Oyo, and Jos. Some of them were attributed to the deplorable conditions of the facilities, while some others may have been engendered by the slow justice system, which makes victims out of the innocent. There are also reports of unexplained privileges offered to some inmates, especially high net worth individuals who found themselves on the wrong side of the law. And only in recent days has come the report that prison authorities have now turned prison yards into fun spots and national theaters instead of reformation centers by organizing beauty pageants within the prison walls, especially for female inmates, including confessed murderers. The explanation of the Correctional Service is that the event was put together to mark the International Women's Day as a way of reforming and rehabilitating the inmates and keeping them in sound and good spirit. The event was fully sponsored with exquisitely dressed winners, in quote, taking away various collective prizes. That is how the authorities described it. Now, expectedly, the pageant and its announced winner have been generating angry reactions from Nigerians. One question that arises is, did the prison authorities give some thought to the sensibilities of members of the public, particularly those of the victims of the crimes that took the inmates to prison in the first place? How much rehabilitation can be achieved through such beauty pageantry? Now, on the other hand, what rights do prison inmates have? There has been an advocacy for inmates to exercise voting rights during elections, which was not considered in the last constitutional amendment process. How far can the agitations go for this right to be achieved? Well, I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Uju Agomo. Dr. Agomo is the founder and executive director, Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action, PRAWA, a non-governmental organization that is focused on promoting security and justice. But to kickstart our discussion, let's take this report on the state of prisons in Nigeria by our correspondent, Opieta Agu.
6 October 2020, during the NSAS protest, when hoodlums attacked the correctional facilities in Ondo and Edo states, while a similar attack was felt at Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison in Lagos, Nigeria's custodial centers have continued to witness series of jailbreaks. In 2021 alone, 1,844 inmates were reported to have escaped from the Owerri Custodial Center in Imo State on April 5th, with over 1,200 inmates still at large. Also in September, 240 inmates escaped from the Kaba Custodial Center in Kogi State after unidentified heavily armed gunmen attacked the facility, majority of them on pre-trial detention. A month later, 837 awaiting trial inmates escaped from the Abologo Custodial Center in Oyo State after suspected gunmen attacked the facility on October 23, 2021. According to authorities, 446 out of 907 escapees were recaptured by security agencies.
All right, my guest is Dr. Uju Agomo, founder and executive director of PRAWA. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Quite some time.
Yes, it has.
So what has PRAWA been up to?
So many things. One of it is actually what you have discussed in terms of the new law, which indeed is one of the good things that have happened to Nigeria. But as you would know, it's one thing to have a very progressive legislature, but it's also another thing to effectively implement it. And by the way, that law was signed on the 31st of July 2019, but it became publicly known around 10th of August. Yes. But the president signed it on the 31st July, so the signature on the document, on the law itself, says 31st July. So that's part of what it's been about, the issue about the law, trying to create awareness about it, but also trying to ensure that all the key stakeholders that need to do something to activate the spirit behind that law. And that's really the key issue. That's what needs to be.
It's almost 3 years now.
Yes,
in fact, let's say 2 years, 7 months or 8 months. That's almost 3 years since that law came into being. And one would expect that there will be a lot of noticeable changes.
There are some things that have changed, and maybe I should just quickly mention it. There are some things that have changed, there are some things that have been done, but there's still a lot that also needs to be done. And interestingly, some of those things are not also the things that the correctional service themselves need to do. So, for example, you were very correct that the first session of that law, actually the first 2 sessions, announced this new change of name, and then of course indicated the 2 parts, the custodial and the non-custodial. Now, if you go to Article 2 of that law, especially I think it's Article 2, Sub 1, it gives you 4 different objectives for that law. So let's take it one by one and then we'll ask ourselves to what extent that is. The first, it says that the purpose of this law, the objective of this law, is to enhance effective observance of international human rights standards and good correctional practices. That's one. So it's about human rights compliance and also looking at correctional practices that can make good impact. The second is that it's supposed to promote enabling platform for the effective implementation of non-custodial. The third is about promoting the 3 R's, apart from correction, the issue of reformation, rehabilitation, and reintegration.
Yes.
And the fourth is that it's supposed to establish enabling and institutional as well as sustainable mechanisms for dealing with the problems of awaiting trials. So those 4 things, and you and I know that if we are actually able to implement those 4, things will work well. So on the ambit of the non-custodial, which is one of the very fundamental things that happened, one of the things that we observed is that the Nigerian Correctional Service, in compliance with Section 8 of that Act, established a new directorate, which is called the Non-Custodial Directorate. Before, there were only 6. Then they now had 8. One, which is that non-custodial, with an introduction of one purely dedicated to staff training and staff development, okay? Now, within that non-custodial, including having a separate unit, a separate building within that headquarters complex for the non-custodial measures, then appointing the following. You now have a Deputy Controller General of Corrections in charge of non-custodial. Apart from that, you now have Assistant Controller Generals in charge of each of the 5 areas that are mentioned under Section 31 sub 1 of the new law. So both in terms of community corrections, parole, probation, restorative justice, and then special duties for any other non-custodial sanction that the court may deem necessary. At the state level, you also have the designation of a particular unit for non-custodial and a Deputy Controller of Corrections for non-custodial measures. So you have the structures. Then you're also seeing that many, on some of the jurisdictions, including FCT, Kwara, and so many other places, you will see the local government helping them, the non-custodial, to establish mechanisms and platforms there, and staff have been designated, some of them implementing this work. But now, look at the catch. There have not been a single penny, to the best of our knowledge, that the government have released in terms of the implementation of non-custodial. We've raised this issue as Prawa, and we said, how can you do that? You have a new law, and that new law has its requirement that needs to happen. Even that same law, under Section 44 of that law, talks about the non-custodial fund. And we're told that there was an error, or that they didn't remember, or whatever. But whatever that is the case, it doesn't help. Now, what we have seen that have happened is the Correctional Service use its mechanism. So, for example, they use staff that they had and pushed out there. All the training institution of Nigerian Correctional Service, all the staff, instruction staff, have been trained on non-custodial measures. There have been certain tools provided. There have been standing orders produced and all that. But there's more that needs to be done. I also realize clearly, even with the debate that is happening, there's also a lot that needs to be done in terms of the conceptualization of what correction really means, and in terms of the attitude of the public. For us to understand, what does correction imply? If you look at Section 10 of this Act, it tells you fully what the custodial officers are supposed to be doing with the inmates that come in. Because every inmate that come in, unless the person is killed or dies in there, that person is going to come out someday. And therefore, we should be concerned about what happens in that person. And it is important also for the general public to understand that it's not everyone you see that is in custody that is a hardened criminal. So you have the innocent in there. You have the minor or petty offenders in there, and then of course you have the hardened criminals. But for each of these persons, there is a need to ensure that the needful is done because of the issue of our own security and safety outside. So that's another thing. Now, part of what this new law did, which we should celebrate as Nigerians, is the fact that it's begun to integrate the whole nation of restorative justice, which says you don't only talk about the offender, what of the victim? So in terms of this provision, if you look at the whole part 2 of the new law, it tells you that in relation to restorative justice, it should happen at the different stages. At the police stage, at the trial stage, at even the stage where the person has served the sentence and is going out of custody. So for us, every offense that has a victim requires to also consider the dimension around the victim, okay? So, and it doesn't matter what sanction that is, even if that person has fully served their sentences or not, or provided the person accepts that they are guilty, or accepts that there is a victim, or there is a victim, you need to be able to identify and find out what are the needs that the victim has.
Now, you talked about the absence or the reluctance of government to provide the necessary resources for the non-custodial component to be implemented. If we recall correctly, since that law was signed in 2019, there have been budgets in 2020, in 2021, and now 2022 budget. So we have had three budget cycles, and I'm very sure that the Correctional Service, being under the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Interior, as it's called now, has had budgets made in these 3 budget cycles. So how come we're still talking about resources for the implementation of a law that was signed as far back as 2019.
I think this is really the shame. And I think this is really where, as a nation, we find that really, and this is not only in terms of this particular piece of legislation, you see it all around. And that's why sometimes people say that the problem with Nigeria is not lack of laws, but effective implementation of the laws. So you need a political will. And then also you need to also understand that certain levels of this work need to be done as a partner. And you need to also see, so what is the role of the government? And when I mean government, I mean all sectors of the government, including the judiciary, including the legislature, including, of course, the executive. But also, what can others, what can the private sector do? What can other players bring to bear? What can the community? Because we've realized, and this is something I think that we all need to begin to key into, the whole notion of the whole of society's approach. If you think of it, how did this person or this person get into a crime? And that's why when you do your need and risk assessment of its meaning, you see certain areas. Some of these persons you are looking at, the challenges they have because they have little or no job, little or no training, you know, all kinds of calculations, including mental state of certain persons. So for you to be able to address this, you need to get to the root cause. Do you get? So why have it not been done? I can't say for the executive why in fullness, but whatever it is, I don't think it's good enough. And that's why I'm hoping that a program like this can also let people understand that once we do not do the needful, we are actually hurting ourselves. And what I'm thinking about is the notion of how can you effectively do the process of corrections, the process of reformation, the process of rehabilitation, the process of reintegration without doing the needful. And it's us, it's you and I that is out there in the community. So again, I think that it is necessary to ensure that adequate funding is given to fully actualize the spirit and the content of the Nigerian Correctional Service Act in that regard. In addition to also ensuring that processes that are supposed to prevent, because it's not only that's supposed to prevent people from even getting into this issue of offending is reduced. So it's one thing to reduce your offending or make sure that the person doesn't reoffend. It's also another thing to ensure that you don't even offend in the first instance. So the whole notion of prevention. So it is possible to be done, but as a people, we have to be committed to it. As a people, we have to be committed to it.
Because it's difficult for very many people to believe or understand that in the last 3 budget cycles, not enough resources, if at all.
That's what I'm being told.
And
we have also interfaced with some of the parliamentary committees, and we raised this. We've done, as Prawa, we've done some trainings, some sensitization, some engagement, policy engagement with, and we said this is a challenge here, okay? And I will tell you that many countries, even in West Africa, are so happy about the content of this law that they are even asking, they want to go and replicate in their own countries. And yet, we just have this law and we have not fully actualized it. So it's wrong. But again, as I said, there is a role for the government. There's also a role for each and every one of us, including the communities. And that's why I want to also use the opportunity to commend the area councils and the local governments that have started partnering with the Nigerian Correctional Service non-custodial measure by giving them facilities in the communities, because these places need to be there to be able to also ensure that these people are supported. One thing we must understand about the beauty of non-custodial measure is this, and help us understand this, I give you one example. If somebody who have served their term in custody, they finished, and you are asked to go, and the correctional officer feels that the person is not fully rehabilitated, or there is a problem, or the person hasn't changed, there is nothing they can do because you have finished your sentence as dictated by the court. They will let you go. But with the non-custodial element, what it does is that it provides officers in the community who can follow up. But those officers have to be also located in places that are close to where you are. They have to have mobility to do that. So those elements are things that we need to look at. There have been some gains. I mean, look at during COVID. FCT alone processed over 23,000 persons on community service in FCT, done by non-custodial officers in FCT. So imagine what would have happened without that service being. But it is not only about community service. There is also, and So if you look at the gamut of non-custodial measures, you start with community service. So for those who are at very low risk, and the community service, the beauty is that instead of you putting the person in custody and having government feed the person is doing work at no expense to the government, to the credit of the community and the government. Yeah. Now, but apart from that, there is also the probation. And what is probation? Probation means that when you see some offenders, and those offenders, basically, there are reasons that they have committed these offenses. And if you want to reduce their chances of committing offenses again, you want to put some conditions. So, for example, you had a problem of anger, you killed, or you've fought somebody, or you assaulted somebody. Part of it may be that they found out that you have a problem with anger management. Or they found out that you're using drugs, for example. Yeah? So part of your condition will be that you will go through a process where they do anger management course, a process where you deal with the issue of your drug problem. Sometimes it's like you don't have a job. And the part of it will not be that you are trained. Now, tell me, if you don't have the adequate facilities to do this, it becomes a challenge. So again, whether it's community service or probation or parole, which means that the person has served some time in custody, but it's been of good behavior, and you want the person to serve the rest outside. Somebody needs to stay monitor. Or even in terms of restorative justice, you still need enablement of the staff to do the needful. So again, I think it is a shame as a country that we have a good piece of legislation like this, and we have not done the needful to ensure that the right thing is done.
So we produce laws without thinking of all the structures that are needed to implement such laws. But the direct fallout of that has been the frequent incidents of jailbreaks that we have had between 2021 and now. Almost 4 or 5 jailbreaks, major jailbreaks.
That jailbreak is an issue that is very sad. What led to, in terms of making this law, the Nigerian Correctional Service law of 2019, there were bills. There were primarily 4 private member bills, both at the Senate, and a different set of 4 private member bills at the House of Rep. One of those bills I remember vividly was a bill dealing with issue around security. There was also another one dealing with issue about women and all that. And if you see the content of this 2019 law, you will see there was an attempt to carry all these 8 different bills in one way or the other. The one relating to the security, what the provisions that you have in the law was very clear. It looks at first the issue about buffer zone. And now let me tell you, what is it saying? Because many of these facilities were built when urbanization had not come in. So it said, 1, that there must be a distance, a proper buffer zone between the facility and, where it's not accessible to people. And especially as you see that in urban areas and everywhere. So he said, both with the existing ones and any other facility that is going to be accepted, that there must be a limit to ensuring where people can come in terms of buffer zones. It also said that there should be designated clear provision, and also clear provisions of technology and facilities to promote security, CCTV cameras, body scanners, and the rest of them. And that same law said prioritize maximum security facilities. The question is, has that been done? Thirdly, you find out that every inmate has a different level of risk and needs. So when you have a categorization of facility, part of what you need to do is that once you categorize facilities from low to maximum, so in this country it will be from a place like open prison farms like Kakuri to prison farms where have no parameter walls, up to medium security facilities, to the extent of maximum security facilities. Now, in places like the UK, you will have that categorized from A to D categories. But the question is that it is not just categorization or classification of a facility by name. That regime, what I mean by what is called regime, is that the programming in that facility must be aligned to the nature of that designation. It also means that the kind of inmates that are processed must also be to that designation. Another very sad thing is this. If you look at the Mandela Rules, which is the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for Treatment of Prisoners, part of what it talks about is this whole notion of classification, registration, and things like that. But what do you do when you have a problem? You said it all, even in terms of the capacity. When you have a problem in terms of space, especially in urban facilities, there are about 30 facilities in Nigeria, 30 correctional facilities in cosmopolitan area that is, their main challenge in terms of population and crowding. So what happens is that the only major classification you will have is that male and female, maybe in terms of female being there. But by the way, that is also another thing in the act which says that every state should have facility separate for women, every state should have facilities for young offenders and all the rest of that. That have also not been activated. So what this means is that if there is a challenge in terms of space, the correctional officers will have a challenge in terms of determining, even if they find out you're a minor offender or a first offender, where are they going to keep you? So if there was a time your awaiting trials were kept separately from convicted offenders. Now in most facilities, they can't do it anymore. So again, we need to deal with it. And that's why, you remember that fourth objective I told you about dealing with awaiting trial. If you go to this same law, go to section 12 of that law, from subsection 4 of that section 12 down, it tells you that every facility that is going beyond a designated capacity, because all of them have their designated capacity, that the superintendent in charge or the state controller should trigger an early warning to make sure you inform the chief judge, attorney general, prerogative of mercy and all the rest of them, for them to do something.
Is there any of the facilities that don't have a problem with capacity at the moment?
There are many. There are many.
Looking at the figures.
No, there are many, and let me tell you the problem. There are many facilities that are under locking across the country. Now, remember I told you there are about 30 that is causing this problem, but those 30 are in urban areas. Now, you may ask, so why don't you make the move? Remember the proportion of our facility in terms of those who have not been convicted. That's where the problem is. Because the Controller General has the power to move an inmate from one facility to another in the country. The zonal coordinator has the power to move an inmate from another facility to another within the same zone. The state controller has the power to do that for the facilities that are within the same state. But if you have a high proportion that have not been convicted that are still going to court, now if you move them to facilities that are under the same, when they're going to court, what do? It becomes additional administrative burden. And that's why it will be better that we process our waiting trials well. If we can do that, speed up the trial, determine whether this person is guilty or not. If the person is guilty, and you find out, you give the sanction. If it is community service, you deal with it. But there is an obsession, and let me repeat it, an obsession with custodial sentences, an obsession with even pre-trial detention. For those, including those who are not at risk facility people, you think that everybody should go and be put in custody. That's not good for a nation.
All right. Well, let's take a short break. When we return, we'll be looking at the treatment that inmates should be getting and what are the rights that they can exercise. Stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us. Now let's look at the treatment that inmates of prisons or correctional centers, as they are called now, are given or are entitled to. We see that, like you described them, people who are waiting trials are bunched together.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, bunched together with convicted persons, criminals, even hardened criminals and all of that. And from time to time, you discover that some of the very congested prisons in the urban centers is where most of this happens. The concern in society generally is that at the end of the day, some of these first offenders, minor offenders, and even those awaiting trial may come out of the prisons worse than they went in.
Yes, you're right. Your guess is correct. I mean, that's why we talk about the University of Crime. And that happens even in the police cells and other detention facilities. And that's why, as a people, we must be careful in terms of what we do in terms of pre-trial detention. We are overusing pre-trial detention in this country. There's a reason why there is bail. The bail is not very well utilized, and even when conditions of bail are given, they're given so stringently that it's difficult for anybody to be able to, some of them to be able to meet it. So that's wrong. So yes, you need to be able, now let's think of this very clearly, and I want to be as simple as I can. Remember that all through the criminal justice system, each agency has its designated role. So for the police, you know about the investigation, the prosecution, the trial, and all that. By the time a conviction is made, the correctional service role is to ideally implement the terms of that sanction. But because of this overburdened nature of having high number of awaiting trials, you have a lot of them that are also kept in custody. And that's why part of their role is to keep, those who have not been fully convicted, but normally what you say awaiting trial, though some of them, their trials have started, in custody, and then transport them to places of trial. So you find out that what is the essence? You want this person to be better, isn't it? So take the person who is guilty. You want that person to be better. You want the person, when the person finishes serving their term, you want the person to be better. And therefore, if you want the person to be better, you have to think about what are the things that made that person go wrong. Some of them, it is because of family background, society, abandonment, educational system, and all sorts of that. So you need to tap it, whether it's mental, whether it's economic, whether it's spiritual, whatever it is. And therefore, develop appropriate interventions. So you will find out that a high number of persons who are in custody have not had proper education. So that's why I want to also commend the Correctional Service, because they are partnering with Open University to have education provided in terms of, for some. I know there are people who are even doing PhDs in custody. There are people who are doing masters. So because of that level, because you know that once the person has education, by the time the person come out, the chances of that person getting a gainful of employment is high, okay? Including also providing informal vocational trainings for those who can't, or as an additional. So you provide that. But that is a program in itself. But also you need spiritual. Okay. You need programs that also deal with mental health of that person. Like when I talked about the issue about anger management and the rest of that. You need that. But apart from looking at these kind of programs, now you ask yourself, you also want to keep the person safe while they are in custody. So medical services are also supposed to be provided for the person. Now, if the person has not been convicted or is still going to trial, the person needs to have access to the process, so legal representation and the rest of that. And we should not forget that that our Constitution clearly provides what the rights of the persons, that are being processed through this process should have. There is also the United Nations, like I said, United Nations Standard Minimum Rule for Treatment of Prisoners and other legislations.
Yeah, now that will bring me to the very recent issue, the very recent development. The one that has gone viral, where the facility in Kirikiri organized a beauty pageant to mark the International Women's Day, and this, of course, has generated a lot of anger, a lot of reactions in society, and many people have been wondering, was that the best way to reform, to rehabilitate, and regenerate these young ladies who have found themselves in prisons? Okay. Does it in any way have anything to do with the UN rights that you talk about, for instance? Okay,
first, I'm just, if we understand that there is a need to do assessment of risk and the needs of every inmate and provide tailor-made interventions to address this so that you reduce those risks and this. That should be the guide for every correctional officer. So it means that once the person comes in, you make sure that that assessment is done through their, the admission board and the rest of that. Straight to the question you have asked, I want to tell you the very first facility, and I should also say this, I have visited over 150 facilities across 32 countries. So I can tell you, and this is not only in Nigeria, both in different African countries and elsewhere. So I can reasonably give some comparative analysis here. I've also done over 1,000 visits in prisons across the world. The first place I saw a beauty pageant program in prison was in Kenya, first time. And that was a facility called the Langata Female Prison. The Langata Female Prison in Kenya is a female facility just for women alone. And if I remember vividly, the officer that was in charge of that facility is somebody called Wanini Kenyane. She ended up winning an award during the International Correctional Prisons Association's annual conference for that innovation. But look at what they did. The Langata program was not only about beauty pageant, it was about everything. It was a comprehensive program, including the introduction of what they called parenting, remote parenting. That remote parenting now has been adopted even in facilities that are men, even in Kenya. Even now, the presidency also keys in. And what does that mean? There you have a program. The Prevent Parenting is the program that enables inmates that have children to have one day where their children can come in, they look at their assignment, they look, just like being a mother for one day with this inmate, okay? So when it's extended for the men also do the same thing. Now, this beauty pageant, and you saw it, and one of the things, because it became interesting, and I started chatting up Wanini about this innovation that she had shown me. Part of it was also beautification of the environment. They were made to take projects to plant flowers and do all that. And she started explaining to me that, and this is very clear, a lot of time women like, a great number of them like things about beauty, about hair, dressing, so even when you do skills training, they like more things like that is about fashion. So things like bead making, things and different things like that, including this, in terms of, at least as I said, I saw it that place once. Now, what I think is important as a nation that we should be looking at is that we need to ask ourselves, what are the different things that needs to be put in a particular facility that we think it would engage these people. But is engaging them, yes, to relax, because I wanted to mention to you, all the facilities that you see that there was a jail break, go and look at the proportion that are awaiting trial. All of them, not one. There was always a disproportionate number of persons who have not been convicted. And that's why we really need to address that issue. So part of what you need to do is that you need to keep these people calm. Have we ever wondered that the people that many a time their families are not able to culture them, tame them, some of them schools have not done it, and all of a sudden you are putting them in a facility and you're asking correctional service to do the magic. So they need to ask for God's wisdom to be able to even know what are the different programs that need to be intervened. But it's not just about one. My concern here is that the issue is we should be concerned about how do we do a proper need and risk assessment.
But how does that speak, this particular instance, how does it speak to the sensibilities of the victims? Because we talked about
the victims issue.
Yeah.
Now, so what issue. I think,
for instance, before you come, for instance, if that beauty pageant had to be done, why was it not done? I've seen situations where inmates of prisons get involved in other social activities, but they are in their prison uniforms.
Okay.
Why import into the prison yards such trendy clothing from outside?
Okay, let me also say, I have also seen where they have done drama wearing clothes that look dead. And I will also, so the point here I'm saying, whether it is uniform or not uniform, I just wanted, and the one I saw in Kenya, they also did not wear their prison for that particular program, because I actually participated in that. But what I want us to look at is to say, yes, for the victim, we need to, and it's not about whether there is a program around creating activities around reformation. These things are not an either or. We shouldn't say, okay, because we don't, even when we don't provide, because in some facilities, they're not providing activities and adequate activities for inmates. That does not stop providing something for the victim. So again, I agree with you, and this is also within the spirit of the Nigerian Correctional Service Act of 2019. We must have a focus on the victim. We must ensure that the victims are taken care of. Not also, many of the time, you are having elongated trial. Nobody is providing psychological intervention for the victims. Nobody is doing the needful. Even when, as I said, even when the person has finished serving their terms. That does not stop that area. However, the program that you need to do for the inmates, you need to also, don't say you shouldn't do because you haven't done for the victim. So all of this we need it. But again, I think there are a lot of things that can be done. If you go to Ikoyi, for example, there was a day I did a mapping of the fast train programs and activities in Ikoyi Custodial Center. I got 19 different activities. And in Ikoyi, of course, I didn't, there was none about fashion. There was nothing about, I saw things about baking, I saw things about making different kinds of things. So the different correctional centers tend to enhance different things depending on what they have available. Let me also use this opportunity to commend what I see in Oka. The officer in charge of Oka, I am so amazed that he's running programs teaching them how to do tie and dye with, cloth and so many things. So again, I think that we should encourage activities. We should also ensure that these activities are such that should actually tame the inmates, those who are offenders. It should be things that create activities. I'm also not thinking that every activity you do in custody, you should publicize it. And I don't also think that.
Exactly, because if I carry a camera today and I'm going into any of the custodial centers, they would not allow me to take cameras. Yeah. But here we've seen a situation where the authorities themselves are the ones publicizing this beauty pageant that took place at the Nigerian Correctional facility. And that, of course, speaks to the sensitivities of the public that I talked about earlier.
I think there are two things that you will see happening here. I think one is that perhaps because of the particular high-profile matter case, that's why people are probably reacting to this.
Yes.
There are times, perhaps, if this is done, it should even be, say, oh, this is showing, because I guess the idea was to say to the community or to the society, we are also trying our best to normalize, because the idea, even in the Mandela, is that we should try to make the facility as close to normal life as possible. The only thing you are doing is limiting their movement. It is taking off that right to liberty. They can't go out. But apart from that right, every other right in terms of that is within according to the law is given to the person. You know, if they are sick, they can be treated. If they need to sleep, they should be able to sleep. They want to drink water, to bathe, and all the rest of to contact their families, they should be able to be allowed to do that. Okay? So all of that needs to happen. But again, as I am saying to you, maybe part of it is to say to the world, we are actually reforming, we are trying our best. And I will say to you, I have been in that facility, the female prison, or former prison female custodial center in Krikri, several times. And short, my PhD work was on that. I've also seen the officer in charge, in short, even there, they call her mommy. The image, you see the way she interacts there with them. It's a different kind of bonding. I've seen her, I've watched her. Okay? And it's somebody that I have seen over time. That same woman, when she was, I think, doing her youth service, I think it was in Owerri, she did things with her youth service fund to be able to build, whether it's water tank or something in Owerri facility or something like that. She did something similar in Enugu when she was there. So again, you will see certain levels of trajectory. But I guess what people are reacting to is because this one has to do with high profile. You know, so sometimes you see people doing things, and there are many times people have gone into that facility. The female facility in Krikri has the main female facility in the whole of the country. Though, as you know now, the new law has said every state, and there are about 2 or 3 other smaller ones coming on. But that is the one that is the biggest. That is also the one that where you see a lot of activity and programming beyond what you can see in any other facility. Okay? And part of that is also creating a lot of models that people are even told to emulate. But I guess that part of what we need to be able to look at is, again, what does this reaction tell us as a society? Is it telling us as a society that we are concerned about how the persons who are in custody should be treated? Is it telling us as a society about truly that we should be concerned about how the victims should be treated? And I must ask you, if they didn't see what they saw in terms of the person involved, would we still talk about the rights of the victim? Because I think it's an important right that should be spoken about. So how much of that support network have we given to the victims? So again, we're talking about balance. And this was what Oputa said. As it then DJ for. You know, he said that justice must be seen to be on a tripod. Whenever we deliver justice, we must ask ourselves, what is this justice doing for the victim? How do we help the victim heal? Sometimes the victim's interest may not be kill the offender, no. But the point is that, can the victim be told, why me? Why did this happen? What am I going to do to ensure that I will not be a victim again, or others will not be a victim again? And I have seen instances where that level of reconciliation had helped heal. There was a particular case we handled in Enugu. That person, somebody was quarreling with a friend and the person died. And later on, they had a reunion with the family. And it was a progressive program. The second is about what happens to the offender. And as I said earlier, unless the offender dies in custody, it's going to come out someday. So we must be concerned what we do with this person so that the chances, and it has to be a holistic package, mental, spiritual, everything, that this person will truly be rehabilitated. So it's not for the society to determine which, choose and pick. But again, it's a question of knowing that this thing you are doing, you have done a proper need and risk assessment and find out that this is adequate to bring this person to a point where he will not offend again. And finally is the community.
Okay. Now, there's been this agitation for prison inmates to have voting rights. Is this a trend that you think would materialize someday into having some of these inmates being able to vote, or if not to be voted for, but at least being able to vote during the elections?
Yeah, I think
are there precedents anyway?
No, I think it's something that should. I mean, even Ghana already is pushing on that track. I think it's not a bad idea. Remember, if you just think of the fact that all that you are supposed to do is to actually the issue of punishment. Yeah? The issue of serving the sentence, the sanction, and the issue around the content of that sentence. So if the sentence says you should stay there for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, for 5 years, then that is what you need to say. And I think it is also important that people know who are the people you find in custody. So maybe that will help us to articulate well. There are primarily 3 categories of persons you find in custody. 1, there is also the innocent. They didn't do anything, my brother, nothing. They had just been arrested, the wrong person, and sometimes they are there, trial is still going on, they don't, and they're there. So, again, for somebody who is innocent. Secondly, there are people who are minor offenders. Hawking, things that you don't need to put them in custody. Yes, they have offended, but there are better ways to deal with them, more so now that we have non-custodial measures. Thirdly, are of course the hardened criminals, which again, as I said to you, unless they are going to not ever come out again in life, then you can forget them, lock them, throw away the key. But if they're going to come back, you want to do as much as possible to get them to have something that is close to what is outside, with of course the issue of their liberty being limited. Okay, so what the argument about people voting is that this is clearly a right that should be expressed, but also this is another thing that has happened. When people know that the population that is in custody can have a view in terms of determining who comes in or who doesn't come in, there are certain things that they will begin to be concerned about to be able to reform. Perhaps maybe that time the issue about our justice system will be addressed. And let me say this, in terms of voting rights, every Nigerian should vote, including those who are abroad. Yes.
Diaspora voting.
Yeah, we should find a way that everyone who is of age should be allowed to have this, because this is really the only opportunity where you have a power as a citizen to determine who comes in. Because once a person comes in, then you are going to be bounded by the rules.
But that presupposes that in the case of inmates, that the candidates will have to go into the prisons to go and campaign. Or how do you reach them?
The issue about operational, just like now, let me say, when you are even trying to create awareness, you have issue of AIDS, HIV AIDS. You get in there, you can still do awareness. You can even use staff, train staff to do that. I'm just saying the operational, how this can operate can be different. You also have TVs, videos. TVs can even have recorded messages. You have certain programs that you can have that can be watched. So again, I think the fundamental thing
TV and radio sets allowed in the correctional centers now?
No, let me just explain. I think that the process is that even in terms of some of the training, like some of the training with the open universities, I think there are some computers that are allowed. I'm talking about formally allowed. I do know one instance, I think there was a facility I went to, I think it was in, is it Uyo? Akwa Ibom? And that facility was built by the state government. And I saw, at least when I went around, I did see some televisions. So what a lot of countries do is that they provide this, but they regulate the program which you watch. So they look at programs that are educative, programs that have morals in it, and then also you make sure that you ensure that people are not using their phones to watch the one you don't want them to watch. So there needs to be also strict discipline of that in regards to that.
Now, one final question. There are those who think that with the introduction of certain programs in the correctional centers, like the beauty pageant we just talked about, that it looks more like glamorizing crime.
I think part of what I think this is just a very wrong example that you are flying. You know, I said to you that I think what we need to do is we need to map out what are the different programs that needs to happen. And the program, so if you have programs that are meant to create job, create income, those jobs, you know, the kind of program that if you do it, when you come out, you can gain employment. Yes. That is, you know, you can look at it. You may also look at programs they need to do to make people to relax and, you know, like that. And all. I know about even football. I remember there was a time, the guy called Lamborghini, we went to, and this was during the time of Ogudipe, the former Controller General. We went to the medium security facility and we had music. You know, they were a band. He came, he was a band, he just came, and the inmates were so happy. I've seen footballs. You know, that it wasn't, the music was not meant that you will come out and then make money out of music. I mean, you can. I also know that, for example, in Ikoyi, there is a facility where there is issues about band and all the rest of that. You know, so again, I think rather than us being obsessed about whether there is a beauty pageant or not, let's look at how do we ensure that a whole gamut of activities are being provided, and these activities must aim at addressing the risk and the needs of the inmate in such a way that it achieves the whole purpose of correction. We should also not forget the victim. You know, I keep saying this. We should not ever forget the victim. And I think that it's high time we provide some more supporting processes for victims. And again, what can we do to also prevent even this whole thing coming up from the front? What are we doing in the communities? What are we doing with our youths? They're all littering around. And that's also danger.
All right, thank you so much. Dr. Uju Agomo is founder and executive director of PRAWA. PRAWA being a non-governmental organization that is focused on promoting security and justice. It is the prisoners' rehabilitation and welfare action, PRAWA. My guest on the program today, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For your time.
Thank you.
Right, that's our bit today. Thank you so much for investing your time with us. See you again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.